Hey guys, how's it going? So by now you've probably heard the breaking news today, and that would be Bill Barr, according to the AP, essentially saying that there was no widespread voter fraud in the 2020 election, and certainly none that would have had any bearing on the outcome of the election. You've probably heard also the recent court cases in Pennsylvania with the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and many courts throughout the country and different legislators, that state legislative bodies that were going to right the wrongs of this election, and they haven't really been doing that either. And a lot of people are looking for answers. And I know the average YouTube viewer attention span is only 2 minutes, so I can't imagine I'd take more than 10 minutes, but look, I'm not any smarter than any of you. There's nothing I can say, but really, none of us need to figure this out if you want to know the truth, because what's going on right now was predicted a long time ago. And I'm going to quote from 3 documents that were written before, at, and around the founding of this country. And I think if you actually pay attention to what was written by our founding fathers, a lot of this makes sense. You hear things like, well, what is the government? Why was it founded? Who is the government? Well, the government of the people, by the people, for the people. But then again, what about a government by the people? Is that necessarily a good thing? Sure. Is it going to be perfect? No. Are you going to be able to put a government in place and expect it to thrive for almost 250 years? Well, doing nothing more than sitting back and talking about what used to be and what should be and what could have been. Look, if you have a garden and you plant your plants and they start off as beautiful plants, but then you don't maintain it, it's either going to get stricken with drought or the weeds are going to take it over. And you're going to lose all the fruit of your once beautiful garden. And then we hear things about anarchy. What is anarchy? We also hear things about these judges that are appointed for lifetime appointments. We hear a lot about the Supreme Court and Amy Coney Barrett and all of these different various federal judges that seem so far to not really be acknowledging any of the rigging. Well, again, we can sit and complain about it, and we should. It's okay to vent to our friends, but I'm going to share some documents with you that I think there's a lot of wisdom in, that we should all really pay attention to and take to heart. And I think we can all get a better understanding of why we are where we are and how this isn't really shocking at all. It's actually something that was predicted, and if you really think about it, it's like, of course this is going on. Of course it is. About 250 years ago, the colonists finally decided, you know what? Enough's enough. See, they had come to America to have a new world, a new life where they could escape religious persecution, where they could escape the ruling of the king, where they could have individual rights and exercise their natural, God-given rights that have always pre-existed any government and that actually belong to everybody. But they were being infringed upon so much they couldn't enjoy these natural rights. So finally, when they said enough is enough, they got out the quill, they wet it with the ink, and they put it down on the parchment, and they made a declaration. And it said, in Congress, July 4th, 1776, the unanimous declaration of the 13 United States of America, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume the powers of the earth, the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted amongst men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to institute a new government, laying its foundations on such principles, and organizing its powers in such form, as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes, and accordingly all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government, and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And then they go on to finish with all of the list of things that the king was doing and the tyranny that he was imposing. In the Declaration, it says, to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. So if the government is just men, people, then why do we actually need a government? And that goes to the Federalist Papers. And in Federalist Papers 51, James Madison said, but what is government itself? But the greatest of all reflections on human nature? If men were angels, no government would be necessary. But as we know, men are not angels. And it should be no surprise that a government that's created of men who are certainly not angels and are not going to be perfect. And while we strive for a more perfect union and a more perfect country, it was kind of flawed to begin with, right? If you think about it that way. Well, there's actually more that's added with the next thing that I'm going to read. This letter was written by Thomas Jefferson to William Smith. And I want to put this into perspective before I read it. This letter was written in 1787, 11 years after the Declaration was penned and the Revolutionary War had been fought and the United States of America had been born. And now we're 250 almost years later. So just think about this, 11 years versus 250. But I'm going to read this letter from Thomas Jefferson because I really think it answers a lot of these questions, like, why are the courts not working out? Okay? How far has this country strayed away from its founding principles, and how could have that ever happened? And it even talks about ideas of anarchy and things that I think are very relevant to a lot of our discussions that we're having today. And this is the famous letter with the Tree of Liberty quote that a lot of you are familiar with. I do not know whether it is to you yourself or Mr. Adams I am to give my thanks for the copy of the new Constitution. I beg leave through you to place them where due. It will be yet 3 weeks before I shall receive them from America. There are very good articles in it, and very bad. I do not know which preponderate. What we have lately read in the history of Holland, in the chapter on the stadtholder, would have sufficed to set me against a chief magistrate, eligible for a long duration, if I had ever been disposed towards one. And what we have always read of the elections of Polish kings should have forever excluded the idea of one continuable for life. Wonderful is the effect of impudent and persevering lying. The British ministry have so long hired their gazetteers to repeat and model into every form lies about our being an anarchy, that the world has at length believed them. The English nation has believed them. The ministers themselves have come to believe them. And what is more wonderful, we have believed them ourselves. Yet where does this anarchy exist? Where did it ever exist? Except in the single instance of Massachusetts? And can history produce an instance of a rebellion so honorably conducted I say nothing of its motives. They were founded in ignorance, not wickedness. God forbid we should ever be 20 years without such a rebellion. The people cannot be all and always well informed. The part which is wrong, which will be discontented in proportion to the importance of the facts they misconceive. If they remain quiet under such misconceptions, it is a lethargy, the forerunner of death to the public liberty. We have had 13 states independent 11 years. There has been one rebellion? That comes to one rebellion in a century and a half for each state. What country before ever existed a century and a half without a rebellion? And what country can preserve its liberties if the rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms. The remedy is to set them right as to facts, pardon, and pacify them. What signify a few lives lost in a century or two? The tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. It is its natural manure. Our convention has been too much impressed by the insurrection of Massachusetts, and in the spur of the moment, they are setting up a kite to keep the hen yard in order. I hope in God this article will be rectified before the new Constitution is accepted. There was a lot said in that letter. I know it's written in kind of an old way, just the way he worded his words and everything, but he's basically warning about the lifetime appointments of the high magistrates, and he's likening them to kings that would forever exclude the idea of one continuable for life. Well, that is how it ended up getting set up with these court nominees. He's basically saying that after 11 years with the 13 states, if you multiply them, he's saying there's been 150 years combined with each of the 13 colonies having its own year. And he was saying it had already been such a long time since we had had a rebellion, right? And he's saying, what country before ever existed a century and a half without a rebellion? Now keep in mind, this is before the Constitution and everything in the Bill of Rights were all ratified, and he was already talking about how the drafts of the Constitution at that time already had bad articles in them. And he was basically saying, it's pretty obvious, the tree of liberty must be refreshed from time to time with the blood of patriots and tyrants. And he said, let them take arms. He also talks about people being pacified in here. I don't know. I think this has a lot to do with what's going on right now, though. It's been a long, long time. Going back to the fact that, but men are not angels. And this is a government instituted of men. See, this government was set up as a great experiment on self-governance. Knowing that it couldn't be a complete anarchy because, again, people are not perfect, and that's the flaw of anything that's created by men. Knowing that it took an armed rebellion against the king and his tyranny. Knowing that since men are not angels, that tyranny would start almost immediately after it was stopped. And that it would have to be refreshed from time to time. And that Jefferson's basically saying in this letter, amongst many other things, that he was already seeing a huge degradation just in the 11 years after the states have been independent. Well, you guys can leave your comments down there and let me know what you think, but I think this pretty much explains a lot of it. Alright, thanks for watching, and have a good one.